This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. And welcome to I Don't Speak German, which is one of the 6 or so golden tickets in the global Wonka bar glut that is podcasting, issued by the Gene Wilder version, I should stress. And Daniel, you're here too, aren't you?
I am reluctantly here, as always.
Yeah, that's. I think that goes for both of us this time. So, this is episode 110, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about 2 mass murders, which is going to be great.
And how toothache's probably not the proximate cause of one of them.
Probably not. I mean, that's a tad reductive. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. There is kind of an elephant in the room which we are going to just gesture at before we get into the more important and far more depressing main subject of the episode, which is the thing we said we weren't going to be talking about at all. And really, we're not going to be talking about it. We're just going to sort of talk about it to talk about how we're not talking about it, which is, of course, Depp versus Heard. And I think really we just want to kind of point you to other people, don't we, Daniel? Because other people have done this better.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, you kind of made the joke that we were doing Depp versus Heard, like in the last episode. And I sort of made the, I will never, ever, ever talk about this, And I realized immediately after saying it that sounded like really hostile and really negative. It sounded like, oh, I can't be bothered to think about this with my, time. And that wasn't like the intention that I was having. It was more like, so many other better people, namely Michael Hobbes, who has been just brilliant on this subject, has covered it in exquisite detail. We will include links in the show notes. And ultimately, I don't want to sit down and go through hours of trial testimony just to sort of repeat what he's already done. If I felt like I had sort of an original angle on it, I would definitely, do the work for it. But I just don't. I don't feel like that. I don't see anything there that I'm going to find some nugget that nobody else has seen, So I will let people who do that work professionally and delve into it, kind of solve that particular story. And I will instead read the diaries, the 700-page diary entries of mass shooters. Much more.
Yeah, well, there's a division of labor, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, no, I feel very much the same. I mean, I like when you said, we made the joke about Depp versus Heard, and then you said, "Oh, I'm never going to talk about that," and then sort of you felt bad about saying that because it sounded like you were saying something that you didn't mean. That's pretty much exactly how I felt when we did a thing at the start of one recent episode where we sort of name checked the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and it sounds on the episode like I'm just kind of brushing it away because I say something like, well, I'm just against imperialism and that's it. And of course, in my innocence, I thought everybody would understand what that meant. And of course, that is open to various interpretations. And I think maybe since then, specifically with the Jimmy Dore Part 1 episode, people now I stand on that. So I'm satisfied.
Right.
But Depp Heard, I do happen to think it's an important issue in its own way. Again, go and listen to Michael Hobbes' guest appearance on Cancel Me Daddy, which is a good show even when he's not on it, and also an article that he wrote, which I think is on his Substack or Medium or whatever. Yeah. Again, Links in the show notes. Basically, I mean, not like 100%, but I would basically co-sign everything Michael Hobbes says on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Michael Hobbes, friend of the show. I mean, I've chatted with Michael Hobbes. He's a great guy. He is a consummate journalist of the highest order. He knows his shit, even where I might disagree with him on some details. He's great. Like I co-sign, no question. Moving on,
leaving the relatively undepressing subject behind into the main episode.
Leaving like years of spousal abuse behind. Into the darker material.
Horrors of organized venomous misogyny, leaving the relatively light material in the rearview mirror.
Right. Why do we do this to our audience? It's just like, come on, man. Anyway, we got to do this. We got to do this because we're going to talk about 2 mass shootings today, and we're actually getting darker as we go on. We're going to do the relatively lighthearted mass shooting first. And I promise you, again, I feel like new listeners will think that we are mocking this or we are making fun of it. And we do use humor at this in terms of just getting through this material, because it is like, there's no way of talking about this without it being either like ponderous or, just darkly funny, because we're going to start with Uvalde and the Uvalde, Texas shooting by Salvador Ramos and the murder of 19 children and 2 adults. And that's... There's no way, like, if you were to write a dark comedy, like a jet black dark comedy about the failures of the police structure in the United States, and you wrote a sketch in which 10 cops stood outside a mass shooting at an elementary school, waiting for the shooter to just come out on his own, just sort of twiddling their thumbs with like gunshots going off in the background while while parents were begging to go in and save their children, and then they arrest the parent. This would be seen as the most on the nose satire imaginable. Like this would make Natural Born Killers look subtle, right? And
it'd be outrageous left-wing propaganda, wouldn't it? It'd be, how dare you? It's just so unrealistic.
But it actually happened, and then the cops lied about it over and over and over again. Because
that's what cops do.
Yeah, and we'll get into that to some degree here in just a second. I did want to. I told Shannon I was going to do this, so I'm going to highlight here at the beginning, just in case people don't listen all the way to the end. Go support Shannon Martinez, because as ineffective and stupid and evil as the police force in the United States is dealing with these kinds of things, Shannon is the exact opposite, and more money towards her so that she doesn't have to go back to bartending and can do this full time, and hypothetically even hire some people to help her in her work would be really useful, because a lot of what she does is actually consult with schools around the country in terms of like helping them to understand kind of how these kinds of phenomena happen. And if there were, if there were more people doing what Shannon Martinez does, or if Shannon Martinez could do it more often, that would be a very good first step towards actually combating this in a realistic way.
Of course, the first step should really have been taken like decades ago, but
that's the other thing. That's the other thing.
Let's take it now.
I mean, that's the thing that you kind of run into. This is something that Ed Burmilla, again, another friend of the show, he's been on. I've been on his paywall show. He's the Gin and Tacos guy. He does the Master Shut-ins podcast. And he, it's like everything. He's kind of on Twitter a lot, kind of talking about kind of the failures of the Democratic Party and the failures of, sort of our system of governance to actually do anything useful. And
plenty of scope there.
And whenever he kind of, starts talking about this, it's like, well, what? Are you saying people just shouldn't vote for Democrats? Are you saying we should just sit out and just let the Republicans win? Wouldn't it be worse with the Republicans? And it's like, yeah, the time to do something about this was like 30 years ago. And if the Democrats really wanted to do something about it, they would have done it 30 years ago. And that's Ed Burmilla is a professional political scientist, or at least he has a PhD in political science. He was a professor for years. He is now out of academia. He has other jobs now. He's doing other things because academia is a complete fucking shit show. But this is not someone like he, advocated for, voting strategically and for like understanding the realities of Democratic Party politics for decades, or at least for like 15 years on a blog. You can go back and read back in it. I actually did some of that this week just to sort of go back and go, yeah, he has been advocating for like working within the Democratic Party for years and years and years. And if Ed Bermilla is now going, yeah, this is all a bunch of fucking useless fucks. That's a sign. That is a really clear sign of just how far things have fallen, But yeah, the time to do something about this was 30 years ago. The second best time to do it is now, obviously. But yeah, a lot of the like so-called liberal solutions, gun control. Yeah, let's impose some gun regulations that aren't going to actually do anything. Yeah, that's a really great idea. Yeah, let's gin up the Republican base even further by giving them the thing they most fear in the world, which is like touching their magical AR-15s. Yeah, that's going to be the thing, and you're never going to actually enact useful gun legislation on that. It's just not going to happen. So why are we talking about it?
Yeah, by fear, what you of course mean is secretly wished for, because there's nothing they would love more than some kind of Democrat-led, government initiative to take even like 0.8% of their fucking guns away. They would lose their shit, and they would be delighted to have the pretext for doing so.
Exactly. And, like, who's going to be enforcing these rules? The same cops that are completely useless, right? That's exactly who's going. And ultimately, who is this going to affect more? Any kind of gun legislation routinely right now, it is routinely targeted against. It is like, regardless of what's actually written into the laws, it is used to target Black and brown people and other marginalized people in other marginalized communities. Period. And it's just like, I find it just really, and I am not someone who is like doctrinaire about guns. I'm not someone who has, a dozen AR-15s hanging around. Like, I'm a leftist, but I'm not that kind of leftist, like that's not who I am. I have a realistic assessment of like what the reality of gun politics is in the United States right now. And any kind of like sweeping gun legislation that might actually combat this problem is never going to pass. And anything that you pass is just going to be used as a way of, ginning up Republican rage. Yep. And that's it. That's it.
Yeah, I feel the same. I viscerally loathe guns. I hate them. I like any gun that isn't on a screen and sort of made of chunky plastic and goes and fires laser beams. Any gun other than that, I just viscerally loathe it. But you've got to try to live in the real world, I think.
Exactly. So yeah, sorry, we're not talking about Uvalde. We're kind of like getting to the conclusion first, but we are just kind of talking through this, so I feel like it's fine. Salvador Ramos, a day or two after his 18th birthday, purchases one gun, one AR-15, and then a few days later purchases a second. Like basically the moment it's legal for him to do so. And a few days after that, gets into a fight with his grandmother, who had recently kicked his mom out for, they were all living with the grandmother, and apparently the mother was involved, had some like drug issues, and who knows what the details have not really come out on that, but was kicked out of the house. And apparently after a fight over something or other, he shoots his grandmother, non-fatally as it appears, and the details in this are pretty vague, but shoots his grandmother, gets in his truck, crashes his truck a few miles away into a ditch, and then wanders over into the school where he had been kicked out the previous year. Wanders for a few minutes, apparently does not engage with anyone on the outside. There were, again, many like early reports that indicated like a school resource officer had engaged with him like outside the school, but apparently that wasn't true. Wanders in and just starts like shooting people. And people called 911 as he was walking up. There were officers on the scene 2 minutes after he entered the school. And he was eventually found dead in a classroom, having killed 21 people and injured a dozen more. So I forget the exact number, but many, many more people, mostly, tiny children, to be clear. The cops found him. The cops found him dead. by all accounts, they found him dead, having failed to enter and having had to call. Not only did they have to wait for the Border Patrol to actually do the entry, despite the fact that all these people had like high-end SWAT gear and had trained for this exact scenario like a few months before, going against every rule in the book about how you're actually supposed to engage with these things if you trust the sober voices of federal law enforcement, which we'll get to that in a second. Couldn't break down the door, this classroom door. The Border Patrol couldn't knock down the door. They called the high school guidance counselor to quietly open it with his keys or her keys. I don't know the gender of that person. And then they walked in and found the dead shooter. Again, lots of details I'm omitting there. Lots of stuff going on. But this is what cops do. This is more common than you think. I think, and we just did as a bonus episode, we just did The Fugitive, which is a great movie. I mean, you and I loved the movie. We talked it up, but I mean,
yeah,
Tommy Lee Jones, Frank Gerard is not like the model of like what cops actually do. Cops routinely, the Parkland shooting.
Yeah.
Similar situation. You had one, cop who just kind of stood outside and waited, for backup. Cops are not required. I mean, and I'm going to speak to the U.S. This is not like some crazy loony left-wing conspiracy when I say cops are not required to take care of you. They're not required to protect you. Like,
no, that's the Supreme Court.
This is, and I'm going to recommend the first link in the show notes here is to an episode of the 5-4 podcast. This is probably my favorite podcast right now. I adore this fucking show. This is a podcast about how much the Supreme Court sucks. And this is one show where I not only listen,
plenty of scope.
I not only listen to every episode, I generally listen to every episode twice. Like that's how much I enjoy this show. I learn things all the time. And it's funny, like even the hosts, because they started this show in 2019 about like, oh, we're going to talk about how much the Supreme Court sucks. And then they've talked recently about how going through the process of doing the show, they've become even more radicalized. Like once you actually start reading these opinions and once you actually start like digging into what's actually going on here, even if you start from the premise that like this institution is ultimately terrible, you just get more and more radicalized. You just get more and more, let's burn this motherfucker down with every passing moment. And it's kind of a delight. But they did an episode on the Castle Rock v. Gonzales case. And this is a case, and I'm going to read a bit from the transcript of this episode. I've linked to it in the show notes again. Peter says, today's case is Castle Rock v. Gonzales, a case that features two of my least favorite things in the world, procedural technicalities and the brutal murder of innocent children. Later, this case is, I think, maybe the most tragic and poignant in a long line of cases in the Supreme Court and other courts that have allowed police officers and police departments to escape any legal responsibility, even in cases where their actions are grossly negligent and lead directly to the loss of human life. The issue here, simplifying a little bit, is whether the police are liable under the 14th Amendment's due process clause when they don't even attempt to enforce a restraining order involving a rather insane husband, shall we say? We'll get into the semantics, but the real question is this, I think. Do the police owe the public anything at all? And the court thinks, probably not. This is a case in which a woman, Miss Gonzales, in the aftermath of the Violence Against Women Act passed in 1994, thank you, Joe Biden, there was a Colorado statute which required cops to actually enforce restraining orders, and the Colorado legislature passed this law. This woman had a restraining order against her abusive husband. The kids are missing. She goes to the cops multiple times over several hours. She knows exactly where the man claims to be with the kids. She's asking the cops to please just go find him and get these and save these kids from this abusive man who is like demonstrated to be physically abusive to both her and the children. And they just kind of sit on they twiddle their thumbs. At one point, one of them literally goes and has his lunch break instead of doing anything about this. When they eventually find the kids, they have all been brutally murdered. And when she sues, and the case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court goes, well, you can't expect the cops to actually do anything. Like they're not required. They just literally say, no, the cops are not required to do anything. So this is not some crazy loony lefty, socialist, anarchist, like idea. that the cops are, actually just, purveyors of capital and have no actual responsibility to the citizens around them. This is the supreme law of the United States. Like this is the law. Yeah. Literally black letter law at this point. Like the cops do not owe you fucking anything. Period.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's I'm not being original, but the gap between the actual reality of the police, not just in America, but it's particularly sharp in America because America is the source of the lion's share of the world's pop culture. The gap between the reality of the police and the way the police are portrayed in culture is it's chasmic, it's galactic. The gap between the reality and the portrayal. It's just thinking back over our recent bonus episodes, you and I talking about movies we like. We've done The Fugitive, No Country for Old Men, Fargo, LA Confidential, and Seven. Every single one of those films features absolutely insanely fantastic fantasy depictions of cops as moral heroes of some, in some sense. It's everywhere, and it is a total sick fantasy when you compare it to reality.
Yeah, it's almost as if that's like on our mind or something. Yeah, in this podcast. But I think that the other reality here, and I do want to kind of move away from. I mean, we are kind of talking around these subjects a little bit, but I think the other reality here is that even the sort of like the darker and grittier kind of depictions of the police, like if you think about The Shield, or you think about The Wire, you think about maybe not The Wire, but you think about like these. The Law and Order is it kind of has this patina of being like slightly more realistic, and it shows kind of moral gray areas in the law, and what the cops are doing are still kind of fundamentally about cops going out and investigating crimes and actually caring about finding the person who committed the crime, as opposed to just kind of wandering into a crime scene, kind of like half awake with a bagel in their pocket and going like, well, it was probably the black guy. A cop show that showed what cops actually do, which is mostly like roust homeless people and, roust homeless people and arrest black people for petty crimes would not be a very entertaining show,
Pull people over, on the fact that they've got something hanging from their rearview mirror, and that's a violation of code, and, then spring civil forfeiture on them and repossesses half their possessions. People wouldn't believe it. People would not believe it because people are so. Lots of people wouldn't anyway. We're soaked in this fantasy version. We're so soaked in the fantasy version that the reality would seem ridiculous and incredible.
Exactly. The Uvalde shooter, we don't really have a motive. We don't really have anything kind of going on here. There's a lot of kind of speculation. The big right-wing narrative is that like maybe the Uvalde shooter and the Buffalo shooter were in the same Discord chat. Like that was like a thing being kind of propagated on the chans for a while. There's no evidence for that, and even like the right-wing dipshits will say like there's no evidence of this, but it is something that kind of circulates a little bit. The other thing was, oh no, he wore eyeliner sometimes in black nail polish, and so therefore he was trans. It's really like it's the trans people who are committing these crimes, which obviously bullshit. Almost
instantly, right-wing ideologues started circulating misinformation about the shooter in Uvalde being a trans man, I believe, and they actually took photographs of a completely different person online, who I don't even know if it's actually a trans person. But they took photographs of a completely different person who's nothing to do with this whatsoever and circulated them.
I believe that was a trans person, but I think it was a trans woman. I may have my details wrong on this, but like she would literally like posted as like, I'm still alive, dipshits. It is actually like to her credit that she came out and like posted and said like, yeah, those are photos of me. And I'm not the shooter because I'm still here to post.
It's pretty brave in the circumstances.
Oh, no, absolutely. Incredibly brave. Yeah.
Existing is incredibly brave for a trans person now. Just existing in the world as a trans person is an act of bravery. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I these aren't verified things, but I've seen reports. They're coming from Twitter, and they're coming from sources that look legit to me, but I don't know that they're real. But, I've seen various reports of trans people being attacked in retaliation by people Like one story was about quite a small child, a trans child, that was attacked, and on the basis of the misinformation about the shooter in Uvalde being trans. Well, of course, it's not really that. It's not actually that. Oh, I've seen this news article. This thing has been committed by a trans person. This proves trans people are bad. Therefore, I will beat up a trans. It's a pretext. It's an excuse. Yeah. It's something people seize upon to indulge in hate and fear and loathing and vindictiveness. But yeah, and again, in this story that I haven't personally verified it, but in the account I had, this child was not even believed. The complaint was not taken seriously by the police. So again, I mean, you have the convergence right there, don't you? I mean, there's nothing surprising there, but at the same time, it's one of those things that's simultaneously completely unsurprising and so shocking that it makes you just immediately want to die and melt and, seep through the floor.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's I mean, it is just, I mean, again, like we could go around this topic all day long, but yeah, no, the cops are not there. They are not actually there to protect you unless you are a bank, or
unless you're property or an owner of property.
Yeah, exactly.
And that imperative is so completely internalized that the people who cosplay as cops, they strap on, I'm talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, of course, who strap on weapons and insert themselves into situations.
Who's in the news again?
I know. Yeah. But he sort of tries to present himself later on as doing this sort of good Samaritan first aid act thing. But he and people like him went there with the express intention. They're cosplaying as cops or paramilitary or whatever, and their intention is to protect car dealerships and to protect gas stations and stuff like that. They have so completely internalized the fact, whether they're conscious of it or not, that the role of the police is to protect property, private property, and the owners of private property, that is just instinctive. That's what we need to do. We need to go and protect gas stations from the savages. Pardon me. That's not how I feel, but
obviously, no, we need to go and protect car dealerships. And I was actually thinking about this just before we got on, because I was watching like an interview. I was actually watching a Sam Cedar bit where he was mocking Tucker Carlson bit with Kyle Rittenhouse. So, fair enough. I was thinking about Kyle Rittenhouse, and something that maybe didn't come across in our kind of two-parter on Kyle was if you wanted to guard the car dealership, like all you have to do is stand there with the AR-15 and guard the car dealership. And you have a backup guy there next to you, and nobody would have bothered that car dealership. Like, he got into trouble. Like if you accept all of his version of events, because he was going off and running around and not doing the thing that's actually like protecting capital. Like he's going off and he's like, depending on whose versions of events you believe, he's going and offering aid. He's going and putting out fires and all this sort of thing. But like, no, like you look, if you had a militia there and your goal was to protect that property, and then you designate certain areas that are your protected zones, and like, you don't leave it. And that's boring, right? Like that's the boring thing of just standing there, and you're not like in the middle of the story. You're just like doing the actual, like, even if we accept this kind of moral guidepost, which obviously you and I don't, but even if you accept this as like some moral thing to do is to protect the small business with a rifle, you're not doing that. You're running around, and that's also the thing that happens with these cops, like these school resource officers, right? John Oliver had a really nice segment about school resource officers on his most recent show, basically saying like, we need to get these cops out of schools because like what they end up doing, the odds that any individual school is going to be attacked in this way is astronomically low. And so like most of your time there is not spent actually doing like any kind of real security and assessment. Most of your time is spent dealing with like what are ultimately ordinary disciplinary problems. And when those become, criminalized, when suddenly like, a schoolyard, a tussle in the schoolyard becomes something that, gets entered into the system, you're criminalizing these young people. You're taking small children, overwhelmingly black and brown, and putting them into the system. Yeah. And you are using the agency of the state against them, and that's again. Yeah.
Well, there's already the school to prison pipeline, isn't there? And they've brought it into the school. We have phone videos of kids who are said to be disrupting class, and the guy comes in and he slams them to the floor, puts their arms behind their back, puts them in cuffs, and of course it's usually a black girl. because the pattern is being reproduced in miniature within this little space, as above, so below. And it's just, yeah, my God, it's so depressing. But they've internalized they've internalized the fantasy as well as the instinctive knowledge that their job is fundamentally to protect property. They've internalized that fantasy we were talking about as well, Rittenhouse and all these. This is why cops go around with Punisher decals on their cars and shit like this. This is why Rittenhouse is doing what he's doing in the middle. They've internalized the fantasy of being John McClane in the Nakatomi building. Whereas, of course, as we know from real cops, the reality is that the guy would just find the nearest cupboard and cower in the cupboard until it was all over.
Right. And I mean, just to, again, not to play devil's advocate here, but just to sort of you can sort of see a logic to any individual piece of sort of the story, right? We knew the shooter was inside. We thought we had him cornered. We were waiting for backup, so that we could go in and do this safely, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. We waited an hour, but we were, doing all these things. We ran into problems. We're waiting for Border Patrol because they were better armed. We were, we thought we had him surrounded. We thought we had him cornered. Any individual piece, even the arresting the parents, which, is something that really gets people's ire up. Even that is sort of justifiable in the sense of we don't want to send more people into danger. Firefighters on a scene will not allow people to run into a burning building to save people or property because you're just that's just another person the firefighters have to pull out of that. That's just another.
Yeah.
And so there is a sort of internal logic to a lot of this, and this is kind of I do want to kind of move off of this, but if there is a case to be made for having armed agents of the state murder people on suspicion, an 18-year-old man with two rifles walking into a school at 11 o'clock in the morning, that seems like a really good time for that. If there is a justification, I'm not even saying that is a justification, but if there is a justification, that feels like a time in which, I'm okay. If you make a mistake there and, injure someone you weren't supposed to, that seems a lot more justifiable than a 12-year-old with a candy bar, for instance.
Yeah. And look, individual decisions, probably every decision down the line seems reasonable to the person making it. It still adds up to a catastrophic failure. And the thing is, if these people aren't actually very good at the stuff that they claim to be good at, or people say they're good at, or people think they're good at, the things that they're supposed to be good at that justifies the staggering amount of money and power and prestige and materiel that they guzzle from society, then, okay, maybe we accept it's actually very difficult to have a group of people who can do things like raid a school when there's a guy in there with a gun. Okay. And, but maybe also don't fund them and arm them so much.
Right.
Maybe
these are 40% of the municipal budget of Uvalde went to the police department. Now, whenever we talk about those kinds of numbers, the reason is because many of the municipal functions of that government are actually done on higher levels, either the state or federal level. So a lot of the stuff that you think of as a town resource is actually kind of funded through state mechanisms and that. So those numbers seem extraordinarily high in many places when they're not necessarily, but it is an extremely outsized bit of money if what you want is, cops who are actually going to, protect people from violent crime. If you want cops to solve this sort of thing, then that seems excessive, especially since there are photos that came out of recent photos of these exact cops standing there in their fancy SWAT gear with their high-end, thousands of dollars, $5,000 rifles and such. And they're in their big armored vehicles and everything. And then what did they do with it? They stood outside for an hour and waited for backup. Like Barney Fife could have done that. You know what I mean?
So what's being revealed is that a huge amount of social wealth and production and prestige and power is being conferred upon people, not for the actual purpose that is claimed, which is that they're there to protect us and keep us safe, and a good guy with a gun saves us from the bad guy with the gun, but for a different purpose. And you only have to look at what they actually do to see what that actual purpose is. It is to keep social peace within a private property-based white supremacist settler colonial society. That is what the actual money is going to. And I think they're overfunded and overarmed even for that, to be honest. But I think the vast, the militarization of the police and the vast sort of loading onto them of funds and weapons and prestige, it's serving an ideological role. It's creating an impression. It's creating that myth that we were talking about before. And that myth itself is structural reinforcement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, again, just, we can go on forever, but I was rewatching Silence of the Lambs, like maybe a year ago. And if you remember, there's this extended sequence. That movie's from 1991. And there's this extended sequence in which Hannibal Lecter is escaping this terrifying killer who, this unstoppable like wraith of a man with unimaginable brutality, of which every military police resource is being thrown against this man. And the SWAT teams are wearing like less armor than, like your ordinary cop who writes you a traffic ticket today. and that's not even in like New York City or LA. That's like, where I live. The cops will absolutely like they are just wearing like this absurd amount of armor versus what was considered like completely like over the top, militaristic garb 30 years ago.
Nothing gets better. It only gets worse.
Yeah. I mean, ditto the cops in RoboCop, like again, the satire version of military police, of militarized police in 1984 is, it was understated to like by an order of magnitude.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So
we are doomed to live in a world that makes satire look subtle.
Yeah. Again, it is just like the darkest of dark black comedies could not encapsulate this stuff. On that note, we should probably move into the even darker shooting, the actual little kitty neo-Nazi who decided to travel to Buffalo 3.5 hours from his house and shoot a bunch of people at a grocery store. And we covered this to some degree right after it happened. And I knew I wanted to come back to it. Well, I kind of went back and forth on this. I was like, obviously, more details are going to come out. I think it's worth kind of talking about in more detail. We were really kind of fragmentary stuff at the beginning. And then, like, at the time, I knew there was a diary and there was a manifesto. And I had kind of skimmed over the manifesto, which is 180 pages, which is absurd. I mean, it's just absurd. And we talked about...
We talked a bit about that. I read the manifesto too, yeah.
Yeah. But then... the manifesto is deeply uninteresting, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details of it just because it has been widely reported at this point, and I think it's worth kind of digging into some of these details. Everybody is commenting on the fact that it is a kind of largely a copy-paste of the Britain Tarrant Christchurch manifesto. The other thing that it is a response to the Halle, Germany shooter, whose name I don't have at the tip of my tongue, who... was that Patrick Crucius? It might be Patrick Crucius. Anyway, forgive me. I probably got that wrong. Anyway, the Halle shooter went off to a synagogue and attempted to shoot through the lock and then enter and then kill a bunch of Jewish people during their worship. The door was reinforced and there was security inside, and he shot the lock a couple of times and was unable to breach the perimeter, and then sort of like wanders off. And I believe he kind of injures a couple of people and is kind of immediately, apprehended. And this is, beyond, I mean, obviously this is a horrifying act, but this leads to sort of a dampening of the enthusiasm for these things, because he looks like a loser to the people that like want to do these things, to the people who would be cheering him on. It's the war boy in Fury Road who, is like, I'm going to, avenge you, and then like falls immediately off the rig and is suddenly like, he saw me fail. Like that's exactly like, that is a very real moment for these people. It's like suddenly,
yeah,
he's a laughingstock. And not only is he a laughingstock, but part of the purpose of that shooting, if you read his manifesto, which I've read, is he was hand making all of his weapons, proving that you didn't have to have access to American style assault rifles, that you could do this with handmade ghost guns and, like kind of modified, kind of home equipment, that sort of thing. It turns out that I'm not saying it can't be done, but he certainly couldn't do it. And a lot of what Peyton Gendron, the Buffalo shooter, was trying to do was detail his gear and explain exactly how in a state like New York State, which has his terms cucked gun laws, and some of the most cucked gun laws in the world, or in the country anyway, he was still able to kind of pull this off. And so it's almost like this little community of people talking to one another through their manifestos. He's building on sort of the work that has come previous. And over again in the manifesto, he talks about how, the people who come after me are going to learn from this. They're going to find, I didn't do this right. He literally lists in his manifesto, I used this gun for this reason, but if I'd had a little more money, I would have used this gun. There's again, darkly funny moment when he literally says, he goes down the clothes that he's wearing, the particular tactical vest, the particular shirt he's wearing. And in fact, he even lists the underwear he's wearing and then says, if I'd had a little bit more time and money, I would have bought this particular brand of underwear and worn it. That's the obsessive level of detail. That's probably 100 pages of the 180 pages are that kind of detailed step by step. This is exactly how I planned this. Yeah. This is, he's speaking to, there is a perceived community of people. There is this perceived larger meaning than just kind of going out and, killing people. Right. And that's what's chilling, right? That's the thing is he's assuming that he's going to be successful enough that even if he fails in his terms, that other people are going to, learn from his mistakes and then go off and do this more effectively. And that he's deliberately trying to help people to do this. Right. And that's why sharing this manifesto is something that you should do at great risk, after great thought. Jesse Singal on his Blocked and Reported podcast just linked to it openly in the show notes, just, linked to it. So in case you needed another piece of evidence to show you why Jesse Singal is a complete fucking piece of shit, we've talked about doing a Jesse Singal episode. Maybe I'm thinking about it. But yeah, and he and Katie Halper or Katie Herzog, who is his co-host there. Their big take on the Buffalo shooter was, well, he's just crazy. This is just some nut job, and Tucker
so
Carlson,
this is the same take as Tucker Carlson. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you shouldn't blame Tucker Carlson for this. Now, I actually sort of agree, because Gendron not only wrote this manifesto, which is kind of deeply uninteresting, and it's meta interesting, but the actual text is not very interesting. But he also composed a diary, and this diary is composed of essentially, he had a little private Discord link that only he had access to. And he would type up his little kind of entries in this Discord log, and then would occasionally go and copy and paste them into this kind of big Word document. And let me be clear about this, because it is unclear exactly how much we can take this as an accurate representation, because obviously he's writing for a perceived audience. He even says several times in the diary that he has gone back and deleted some quote unquote personal details, some, that he didn't think should be in the sort of public record, but he also sounds very much like a dumb 18-year-old kid who's, planning this, this is, if this was a faked document, this is dramatic overkill. I think many of the entries, I think you can take this as broadly accurate to at least a representation of how he saw this, even if it has been kind of massaged and edited in certain ways. And certain entries are definitely feel kind of overtly, him trying to, deflect blame or, kind of whatever. One of the things that he says is, don't blame my parents. My parents didn't know anything about this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I find it interesting that his parents have not said anything publicly since the, both of Ramos's parents have spoken to the media. Probably not the best thing they could do, but they did speak to the media. Gendron's parents have spoken, according to reports, they have spoken to the FBI but they have not spoken to the media. They have not made, even a, kind of anodyne statement like, our heart goes out to the victims, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have been, just complete radio silence on this. I think that's probably related to the effect of the Oxford, Michigan shooter, whose parents got prosecuted after after it was discovered that they were literally texting with him about his plans, about his feelings about how much he wanted to shoot up the school. That seems to be. I don't want to comment about the parents directly because it's, all we have is, sort of like the Daily Mail has gone after them by interviewing people who just didn't like them in town. And, so you get like, well, they just seemed like kind of weird, off-standing people, sort of thing. And there's, they felt like they were better than us or, kind of whatever. That's sort of the most that anybody has really kind of gotten out of them. And then, what Peyton Gendron has to say about his parents. And over again, he highlights that they don't know anything about this. They know nothing about my plans. I have been hiding it from them. He is literally, again, per his description of what's going on there, he is driving the 45 minutes to campus or the 30 minutes or so to campus, even after he drops out of school. Unofficially he is dropped from his classes after he stops attending, effectively, because he was spending all of his time planning this massacre. He's literally driving to school when he would rather be, stay at home and nap in his comfy bed. He's sleeping in the middle of February in New York State in his car rather than stay home to like hide the fact that he's not attending classes from his parents. At one point, weeks before the attack, he passes his grandmother driving around in town when he's supposed to be on campus. And he goes into this like mini panic attack about like, she's going to find out about it. She's going to call my parents. They're going to ask me about this. They're going to find it. And he's like, I'm just fucked. I'm fucked. This has been a complete failure from beginning to end. And again, he sounds like, this sounds genuine to me, like this does not sound like something that he's just kind of making up for effect. I don't think he's a good enough writer to sort of write this in sort of an empathetic way. I believe that he was hiding this from his parents. Now, some of the things that he's doing with his spare time that he's clearly doing in the garage, like modifying weapons, I think you could ask a question of, how did like all of this completely escape the notice of an adult figure? He seems smart enough to have like, hidden it, but not smart enough to have hidden it well, if that makes sense. And this gets back to the cops, right? He was investigated by the cops after, he had last summer, he had in a senior yearbook quote or something, in an economics exam or something, he had said, it was like, well, what do you plan to do after graduation? And it's like murder, suicide was his answer. And he plays it off as a joke to the psychiatrist because the psychiatrist recalled he actually spends a couple of days in an institution. In fact, one of the very first entries in his diary is a photo of the waiting room that he took that day when he was like waiting to see the psychiatrist before he was institutionalized. This is a big moment. Like people were paying attention, but clearly some balls were dropped. And I think one of the really big question marks is exactly, what the parents were doing, and how accurate are these kind of recollections in the diary about their involvement, about their, about how worried they really were. He's clearly terrified they're going to kind of discover the extent of it. But and he's also like, he has several moving violations. He has several speeding tickets, like enough that like he has an impending court date in which they may take his license away. That's how many like moving violations he accumulates over the course of a few months. He describes at one point on one of his recon missions for this attack when he's in Buffalo. Yeah. He describes having like, hit a telephone pole, like winged a telephone pole with his side view mirror and knocking the side view mirror off. And, speeding and kind of swerving all over the lines through his panic attacks. It is not impossible. Like it is in fact, almost like again, a comedy of errors that, some cop didn't just look around and ask just a few more questions, like I just imagine, like, what if he had gotten in a minor fender bender 3 days before the attack? And, based on his driving record, he ends up spending, 2 weeks in jail. And in the process, suddenly the cops search his house and find all these like illegally modified weapons and that sort of thing. Then suddenly what you have is, a nothing story. Just one of those things that kind of pops up is like, kid with neo-Nazi, messages in his Discord had a bunch of weapons, and then it just kind of disappears into the ether. And this kid was very close to being that. He very easily could have been exactly that guy, exactly that story. And this is, again, a sign of like an actual like community-based policing model that was not based on rousting homeless people and giving speeding tickets, that maybe could have followed up with this kid who had like threatened murder suicide and just started asking him questions. This is complicated, right? Because I get this. The kid is terrified of this process. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to live. He wants to die, and he wants to go out doing something meaningful with his life. But he's also terrified. Like over and over and over again, he talks about not just the terror like to his own life in terms of like, there's a security guard at this, grocery store. I'm gonna die. What if there's somebody with a concealed carry permit there? He's actually happy he's doing it in New York. Like he says, maybe I'll drive to Baltimore because they've got a whole bunch of black people there, and I could just kill more of them. But they have actual like concealed carry laws. And, I'm going to run into somebody who's going to be able to shoot back. Like, and that's a huge thing, He also like,
I don't want to get shot, come on.
Right. He's terrified of it. And, again, I mean, and not to put it all on, but like some community, support model, could have reached out to him and could have, prevented this by just being aware, just being in his life, he's so isolated, right? He's so, he talks about like occasionally he'll kind of go out and like play video games with his friends for a day. And it's like, oh, I didn't get a lot of work done on my project here because I was playing Fortnite, and that was fun. I'm really going to miss Joe or whatever the kid's name is. I'm really going to miss him when I'm in jail, it is, again, this kind of like dark comedy of errors. And don't think that I'm trying to over empathize with this kid. Don't think that I'm trying to pretend that this diary is not filled to the brim with the most anti-Semitic and racist and anti-Black material imaginable. And I say this as as the co-host of this podcast. This is as bad as anything I've seen. Like he is full on siege posting like through much of this diary. He is truly horrendous on an ideological level. But we also have to acknowledge that sort of there is a reality there. He talks about, he posts a picture of his cat. He has this adorable like tabby cat, like an orange tabby cat. And the cat's name is Paige. And he's like, man, the last couple of years, Paige, she's been spending a lot of time with me. She's really going to miss me when I'm not. I hope somebody takes care of her. I hope my parents take care of her. And it's like, you could have listened to that impulse. You know what I mean? Like just have the slightest hint of like a connection to this human world, and that you don't actually have to go and do this. Your cat's going to miss you. That is actually a reason to not want to go to prison. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or alternately to not want to kill yourself, like my cat is going to miss me. There are lots of people who decided not to commit suicide long enough to get help for themselves by thinking, I don't want to leave my cat. I don't want to leave my cat alone without me, because she's going to miss me. That is, I feel like I've spent like 3 weeks like swimming in this kid's like head. And it's so frustrating because like every system failed here. There was every chance for somebody to notice this and to find this kid and to stop this. And I don't mean good guy with a gun. I mean a social worker. I mean a friend. I mean, a girlfriend. He talks about girls occasionally, not very often. He talks about like finding women attractive, but never like ever thinking about wanting to have sex, which is interesting in its own way. He talks about finding himself unattractive, in part because he says I have big lips any big inward lips is the way he describes it. And so therefore I'm not fuckable or whatever, I spent some time on this and I was really just thinking about this kid, and I like have so many screenshots. I might actually write up something about this and kind of walk through some of the details here, because there is a lot of like fascinating stuff of just how close he came to not achieving this, and how like the slightest bit of like institutional structure that would have actually been paying attention could have caught this, and instead they're rousting homeless people. Instead, they're doing traffic tickets. It's the Uvalde cops, the Uvalde cops hanging outside while children are being murdered inside. That's the kind of big showy example of like the police are fucking useless at this. Gendron is the other side. He is the much more ordinary side of this, in which not even like major kind of flashy ideologically motivated violence, but ordinary domestic violence, ordinary spousal violence, violence against children, ordinary bullying, all of these things get left behind. They get dropped because the cops are off doing they're doing what capital wants instead of what is actually like people focused. I think there is nothing that I can imagine that would make people turn to radical abolitionism, police and prison abolitionism, than these two stories. It's like a bright shining star in my mind. It's just, I can't imagine looking at this and saying, oh, what we need is just like reforming the police. It's useless. It's, so yeah.
These are the wages of the last 4.5 decades of the development of capitalism in the West. Capitalism has developed in this ferocious, predatory way. Neoliberalism is what we're talking about. Neoliberalism isn't the problem, but it's the mode of the problem that we live in. And it's not just deregulated capital to an incredible extent and liberated money for the people who have it to an enormous extent, to the detriment of human freedom and human flourishing, and basically privatized or appropriated or enclosed every bit of social wealth or communal wealth that could be prized up, and then privatized the nails as well. It's not only done that, but it's destroyed networks of social support that used to be there, even under old style capitalism, which was still bad. It was still a rotten system, but all those old systems, as imperfect as they were, and they were riven with sexism and racism, back before neoliberalism. Do not misunderstand me. But these systems have been systematically destroyed, from basic things like youth centers and parks for children to play in, but all the way up to welfare systems, just systematically and very consciously destroyed and rolled back, and housing systems left to crumble, and the choice was made very deliberate by people. What we do in order to accomplish this vast wealth regrab, whatever, is we will be left with a load of social consequences. And what we do about those social consequences is not use any of those old systems that we used to have for coping with the social side effects of capitalism. What we do, we scrap all that, we sell it off. What we do instead, and this has been remarked upon by other people, again, I'm not being original, what we do instead is we have military police forces and we build prisons. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Right, and this is obviously racialized, and I agree with everything you said. But at least particularly in the U.S., like it is a direct counter effect of the civil rights era. That once African American people have the right to vote, once Jim Crow ends, or it's ripped away from these societies, and those wounds slowly start to heal. Although they just end up festering for obvious reasons. That the era of mass incarceration begins. Just a few years later, you start to see the most draconian prison laws and the incarceration laws in the world. I mean,
Yep, and the war on drugs, which is essentially part of the same racial.
No, absolutely. And the war on drugs is built expressly. I mean, it is a deliberate one of those things. I mean, Nixon. There are quotes of Nixon coming out and saying, we knew heroin wasn't the problem. It was just a way for us to go after the Black community. Like that's what it was. It is amazing. Gendron lives in this society that inserts so much physical, social violence against African Americans. It's like, it wasn't enough to put them in the poorest places in the world or in the country. It is not enough to subject them to, housing discrimination. It's not enough to put them in the shittiest schools. It's not enough to do all of these things. No, you've got to walk in with a rifle and just start killing them. Like that. It's not overt enough. The system of anti-blackness that we live under in this country. Like it's not enough to do that. No, I mean, and that's like the dopiness of all these Nazis to begin with, is like, you're a white man in America. You're doing great, and Gendron, I mean, he even says, sorry, not to bring it back to the specifics, but Gendron even says, at one point in his diaries, like, I live actually a pretty nice life. I wanted to get, I was going to get an engineering degree, like both of his parents have engineering degrees. He graduated high school. He was in his second semester of college. He's actually, the diary begins like kind of at the end of the first semester of college, but he's going, one of his entries is like, yeah, I had a Calc 2 exam and I had like some engineering labs and a physics lab I had to go to. And I'm like, yeah, I did a lot of that myself. I minored in math. I had labs. I probably took some of those same coursework, and it would not be implausible that he and I could have been in some of the same classes had we gone to the same university at the same time. This is like, he lived a good life. He was living a perfectly fine life, but he got it in his head, like, he got to do this thing. And
he was having a relatively okay life, but the people who should have nothing had 0.1% of something, and that's
right.
Just unacceptable. Yeah,
right.
You're not necessarily doing great if you're a white man in America. This is where like the class reductionists and the supposedly left anti-feminists and anti-identity, quote unquote, identity politics people have a field day. Yeah, there's plenty of white men in America who are doing really bad. But these people like Gendron, they're not coming from the bottom of the barrel. They're not coming from the working class in the industrial cities. They're not coming from the lumpen proletariat. They're from the middle class. So, he is doing relatively fine. I mean, the middle class has been squeezed by neoliberalism just like everybody else, but nowhere even beginning to be as near as other people have, people lower down. But it's the system of white supremacy that justifies the whole thing through getting the layer of the relatively privileged on side. And it justifies the whole thing, that the hierarchy, you're a couple of rungs up. You're a couple of rungs up, but you are made to identify with the guy at the top of the ladder over the guy who's just a couple of rungs below you, because the ideology of white supremacy tells you that the guy at the top of the ladder is somehow like you. And these people are often against like government and people they call elites and so on. But you know what I mean? On some level, they're invisible, the people at the top of the ladder. But the people at the bottom, just a couple of rungs below you, but they're different. So the system of white supremacy says they're the problem. They shouldn't even be on the fucking ladder. How dare you be on the bottom rung? You're going to have to be kicked off.
Yep, exactly. And I think this leads into, the title of this episode is about a toothache, because so Ben Collins, who by all accounts that I've ever seen is a perfectly fine journalist who covers some of these stories, is not a fool. This isn't like a Matt Iglesias or Andrew Sullivan type. This is someone who is trying to, he's a liberal, but he's doing his best. And he's, again, from everything I've seen, I have not followed his career closely, but I follow him, and I think, he has some good takes. He's a good follow. He's a good dude,
I like, by the way, parenthetically, I like how Matt Iglesias is kind of just the paradigmatic fool. If you want to put across, he's not Matt Iglesias, for God's sake.
Well, I mean, he, like, in the sense that, like, Matt Iglesias, I'm not
quarreling with you. I absolutely agree. It just made me laugh the way you used him as quite the quintessence of an obvious idiot.
Yeah, he's not like evil. I mean, even though he often he's like, he's just a fool. That's the perfect word for it. God, bonus episode on Matt Iglesias. Let's just find a couple of columns and like laugh our way through them. Anyway, Ben Collins. I don't know Ben Collins. I've never spoken to him to my knowledge. I don't think he follows me, but he read the manifesto, and I'm using him as this sort of synecdoche for kind of the larger media response to this from people who are not in this world, who do not understand, sort of the memes, who don't understand, some of the bigger picture stuff, read this manifesto and came up with, there were a lot of bad takes. And in particular, The people who read the diary sometimes came up with even worse takes. And Ben Collins, he starts off in the first tweet of this very long tweet thread is, I want to tell a quick story. The Buffalo shooter had a toothache. And then walks through essentially this sort of like logic. He says, over and over again, he talks about his bad teeth. He talks about how, he had troubles with the dentist. He went to a dentist and had to kind of go back. He lost a tooth when he was younger. And, he had like continual toothaches. In fact, I don't think Collins notes this, but at one point he has to push back his the date of his massacre because he's getting a tooth filled. And at one point he mentions, like maybe I'll get better, dental care in prison. Maybe that's. And Collins kind of like leaps onto this as this like, this is a disaffected, youth, a young man who feels like he doesn't really have anything in his life, who's in this kind of constant tooth pain, who is, if only he had better access to healthcare, he wouldn't have done this terrible thing. Now, I am very sympathetic to the kind of big picture, sort of like social democratic argument that like improving in general the material conditions of people in the subaltern classes and of the, kind of lumpenproll classes reduces a certain sense of, alienation that leads people to join these kind of far right parties. Yes, a broad
good
social
things are good.
A broad social, welfare system would prevent, in the aggregate, some of this kind of political activity, whether through overt violence or covert violence.
Gains for the working class are worth having.
Yes, exactly,
we'll take it.
Exactly. But I do not think you can read this diary with any degree of sophistication and come to like that conclusion in this case. And there are a few reasons for that. One is like he describes getting to go to the dentist on like several, like he had perfectly fine access to dental care. Now, he goes back and forth about whether about whether he thinks the dentist is any good or not, about whether he's actually getting the proper care, et cetera, et cetera. He's also in a lot of pain. And when people go through like medical procedures and they don't seem to work, this is, it's a rant in his diary about the dentist. He goes back and forth on this. All right. He's also a stupid kid, so, all right, set that aside.
Yeah.
Also, more than he kind of blames the dentist, he blames, and I apologize, the sugar Jew, who has made his teeth bad by force feeding him all these like sugary candies and all this, that there's sugar in everything you eat in this country. And, it's all just a bunch of bad food. And he would just much rather have healthier food that isn't like contaminated by the sugar Jew, and he uses that term several times, not exactly a straightforward conversation about like lack of dental care necessarily, Also, he has like completely conspiratorial like things about like he eats a ton of McDonald's. He eats McDonald's spicy chicken sandwiches. And the reason he eats them every day is that
presumably the Jews were forcing him to do that, though. I mean, he wanted to go to like the vegan produce aisle, but they had him, at gunpoint, and they were forcing him into McDonald's. Is that right?
This is actually in the diary, and I might actually I've got it in my screenshots. We might put it in the show notes. We'll see. But he actually complains at one point that he can't go to buy food because his parents won't buy. They just buy like ready to eat stuff, because they're both at work all the time, because they're professional engineers, by the way, reading between the lines, but they just buy a bunch of like, kind of easy to fix, like microwavable stuff instead of like good, healthy, hearty food. And then he can't go to the store himself to buy food because he's broke, because he's spending all of his money preparing for this mass shooting. So that's obviously out. It's like, I would really like to buy more like cabbage and potatoes and like go and like hunt for deer or something, but I can't find a deer in the places I'm allowed to shoot and all this. And it's like, oh my God. But he eats McDonald's every day because he has worked out a scam by which if you apparently at this one, either at the store or, whatever, if you buy a spicy chicken sandwich, they give you a survey. And if you fill out the survey, you get another coupon. You get a coupon code good for one spicy chicken sandwich, which means you can then take that coupon code and then go buy another spicy chicken sandwich, which then gives you another coupon, another survey, which you can then buy another spicy chicken sandwich. So he's literally eating like 2 spicy chicken sandwiches a day for free off of this like little scam that he has. And he brags about it several times in the manifesto. You could blame, and then he talks about how like the FBI probably put something. I'm feeling woogie today. They probably put something in that spicy chicken sandwich today. I mean, he alternates between this like complete paranoia and this like just like kid-like innocence in this. And again, that's part of what's kind of fascinating about being there, But and again, I do want to get your response to all this because I am just kind of ranting about this. But if you did want to blame a medical condition on his on what made him do this, the toothache isn't the place to start. He has tinnitus. He has severe tinnitus because when he was a kid, when he went out shooting with his cousins, he wasn't wearing ear protection, and
for fuck's sake,
he got tinnitus, like severe tinnitus. Over and over again, he talks about the headaches he gets from this tinnitus. Over and over again, he talks about how he's kind of like he kind of spirals into this like pain and into this kind of thing of like, talking about the Jews and talking about violent Black people and everything, while obviously in, or at least through my, kind of reading of the text, well, obviously in, some kind of like, manic episode brought on by, feeling terrible and having these terrible headaches brought on by tinnitus. So, I mean, again, I'm not trying to pick on Ben Collins here, but I feel like this is kind of like the nature that like people who skimmed this, got, it's very easy to pick on one or two things and sort of like build a narrative like this is the thing that made this happen. And it's never that simple, but in particular, like when you have like this wealth of material available to you, you really owe it, if you're going to comment on it from a position of having some, journalistic authority, you really need to like take your time with this shit, and you really need to understand what it is you're actually looking at. And I feel like, again, not to pick on Ben Collins, the entire like liberal media industry just completely fucking failed on this one. Like there was just a complete lack of any kind of nuance and understanding. Even more so, I feel like even Britton Tarrant like got better coverage than this. And I feel like, people just found the thing that they wanted to find. And some of it was malicious when Fox News goes like, well, he says he's a leftist, so obviously, he says he's not a conservative. So therefore, it wasn't our fault. He wasn't a racist. He was a Democrat, Clearly not.
Immediately, the second it happens, every reactionary from Fox News to the fucking quartering on YouTube is pushing, well, this line in the manifesto proves he's actually a leftist. Yeah. I mean, that's almost customary now, that bullshit that they pull. Yep. They take advantage of the garbled and confused nature of fascist rhetoric to, well, it's just, the Nazis were socialists. It's in the name. That's all it is.
Right.
Just that shit over again.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, he has like a, and it's like, it's not that when he says I'm not a conservative, I mean, he does say that. I mean, it is part of, but that's also like rhetoric that's very common in far right communities right now is like, I'm not a conservative because conservatives don't actually conserve anything. And I'm actually a right.
Friedrich Hayek said he wasn't a conservative, come on.
Yeah. I mean, Nick Fuentes will say, it's and that's just cherry picking. That's just, and I'm not saying that like Ben Collins is doing that. I think that like, this is like the liberal response is more kind of looking for like a simplified narrative, and that's not what you see in these kinds of things. It's not some simple answer that's going to just automatically like fix this. It's a whole lot of stuff that we should have been doing 40 years ago that's going to like really like solve this problem. But there is no magic bullet, to coin a phrase, as it were, or silver bullet,
I don't know Ben Collins' politics, but it feels like a sort of convergence of the inherent reductionist nature of a media that just has this inherent impulse to narrativize and reduce complex stories down into simple narratives and almost like moral fables, and a convergence of that with kind of this this malaise from like left liberals across to like the Jacobin left, like the social democratic left, in my opinion, very misguided sort of. I mean, people will disavow this when you attribute it to them, but it's, you know, it amounts a lot of the time to, well, if we can just get like Medicare for all, then basically all these problems will disappear. Right. You know, we just because they think that this problem is essentially a problem of they still think, or at least a lot of them do to some extent, consciously or unconsciously, they still kind of believe the economic anxiety narrative and the white working class narrative, and they think, well, if we just throw the crumbs to these people, we just throw them the Medicare for all and a couple of other things, then they'll stop acting up. But that is not. And actually, in fairness to Ben Collins, I think I'm right in saying that if you read down the thread, he tries to make a point about, yeah, this kid has toothache. Just parenthetically, the fact that this kid apparently thought that the son of two engineering graduates, he thought that he
professional
might get
engineers
better
who
dental
work for the
care.
city. Yeah.
He thought that he might get better dental care in prison, in the American prison system.
Right,
I think that tells you a lot about his worldview, which is shaped by his class position. But, you know, putting that aside, Ben Collins kind of has this thing in the thread where he's talking about the kid having the toothache, and it's like he's trying to say, well, the only place he could go to express the frustration and the need that he had was into these communities, like these chat rooms and so on and stuff like that, which isn't wrong in itself. I mean, that's true. These chat rooms and places where he got this stuff, because he didn't actually get it from Tucker. Tucker is dreadful, but he's not the source of it for this person. He gets it from exactly the kind of online stochastic terrorism that we've talked about repeatedly on this podcast. He gets it from there. It's not wrong to be,
just to be clear, he doesn't seem to be a fan of any like particular, like, I don't get the sense that he's like a TRS fan or an Andrew Anglin fan or, you know, a Nick Fuentes guy. I think he's just a 4chan guy. I think he was literally just one of like, and he was just he was just an online meme kit, you know. I never see him like quoting any of these like kind of more kind of more mainstream, you know, Mike Enoch, the mainstream, you know, Nazi. But you get what I'm saying here. You know, he doesn't seem to kind of come from like a particular kind of side of like one of these like ideological wings. He's just sort of seeping in the kind of the garbage dump that is, you know, these chants and these memes are kind of going around. In the last episode, I talked about how so much of his stuff felt like it was like from like 2014. And that's because like, that's the stuff that gets shared in these like shit tier forums, is just like the stuff that all the like smart people left behind 5 years ago. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to like praise Mike Enoch and the TRS crew. Believe me, these are vile, disgusting human beings. But the fact that like he's just kind of wandering around in this thing and he's just absorbing it, that's actually a really terrifying thought. Because it means like this is just the ordinary state of affairs for like young men of his age who have, you know, certain kinds of interests. You know, it really is. This is like baseline. Like every teenage kid has seen this these days.
Yeah. And that is, I think, that is a sign of a much deeper and wider problem than just this kind of simple or almost moralistic fable left liberal or soc dem narrative, which is like, well, he ended up getting this stuff online in like 4chan and places like that because he had nowhere else to go to talk about the fact that he had toothache because we don't have Medicare for all. You know, I think that's a really dangerous reduction of the truth down to a simple formula.
Yeah, exactly. And then Collins goes on to kind of talk about misinformation and disinformation, and you know this. He kind of turns into that narrative, and that, you know, the great replacement is disinformation, which, you know, we're probably going to have to redo, or we're going to have to do another like full episode on the great replacement and just kind of like reorient people to some of these things that we did back in 2019. Just because I feel like we need to kind of, like we did the Richard Spencer Redux. I think we're going to have to do some more of those at some point, just to, because I think there are a lot of people kind of coming into it now and who are not like going back and listening to the earlier episodes. And I feel like that our conversation is kind of moving forward, but I think that, you know, to a certain degree, we are going to have to, you know, kind of recover some topics or at least kind of like, you know, recalibrate some of the conversation around this stuff.
Yeah, because we've looped back to the start of the fucking cycle, haven't we? That's what it feels like. I don't know about you, but that's how I feel.
I've been saying for a year and a half now, like it feels like, everything feels like, 2014, 2015 again. And, given where we know that went, just when the Democrats get absolutely hosed in the midterm elections. Oh yeah. Imagine who's going to, which they will, they're definitely going to lose the House, almost certainly going to lose the Senate. Oh, a leftist is saying the Democrats are going to lose. Oh, you just want the Republicans to win because you just really like Trump. Oh, fuck off. But no, they're almost certainly going to lose. And that's just, for a whole lot of reasons. And when that happens,
they've systematically pissed away every advantage that they managed to achieve in 2020. Right, as we said they would, as they made it clear they were determined to do.
Yeah.
As they
as we said at the time, this is, one more thing I did want to cover then, and this is Sandman. It turns out Neil Gaiman's Sandman is going to be a Netflix series, so everybody go watch it. No, so the diary is actually split up into two parts, and this is there's so much that's fascinating about just the structure of this thing that we didn't get into. I am definitely going to have to write something about this. Oh man, I wanted to just leave this behind, but I'm going to have to do some big project on this because there's just so much here. Anyway, the diary is in two parts. At some point, he loses the ability to edit one of the Google Docs. It just gets too large. It's something like 700 pages. And so he starts a second diary. And in the second diary, which begins about 2 weeks before the massacre, and which runs to something like 80 pages, there are 3 mentions of someone named Sandman, or Saint Sandman. Saint Sandman said. Sandman said. And it's like quotes from this guy. Now, the speculation is that Sandman is actually a retired FBI agent. And let me just highlight that here. From an article in the Buffalo News, authorities investigating if retired federal agent knew of Buffalo mass shooting plans in advance. And then they were talking about there were a few people who got access to the diary and to the manifesto about 30 minutes before the attack, about 6 or 7 people. These were like-minded people who used this chat group to talk about their shared interest in racial hatred, replacement theory, and a hatred of anyone who is Jewish, a person of color, or not of European ancestry, said one of the 2 law enforcement officials with close knowledge of the investigation. What is especially upsetting is that these 6 people received advance notice of the Buffalo shooting about 30 minutes before it happened. The FBI has verified that none of these people called law enforcement to warn them about the shooting. The FBI database shows no advance tips for anyone that the shooting was about to happen. Agents from the FBI are in the process of tracking down and interviewing the 6 people, including the retired agent, and attempting to determine if any of them should be charged as accomplices, the 2 sources with close knowledge of the probe told the Buffalo News. This is a reference. There is someone named Sandman who is quoted, and there is speculation that since we, at least according to law enforcement, and we know law enforcement never lies, that there was a retired federal agent involved, at least was aware of the attack 30 minutes ahead of time and was probably interacting with Gendron during at least these last 2 weeks. Now, the fact that his name does not appear in the earlier logs, but does appear in the later ones, might imply that there were some entries that were edited out that referred to Sandman. That is certainly a possibility. And I have no way of determining that one way or the other. But I do find it interesting that he is only in the second diary entry, the ones right before the actual attack, and not in sort of the prior ones, which we know he went back and edited from time to time. There is a person who went by the handle Sandman, who was active on the 4chan board. This is the weapons board, who apparently was a 50 or 60 something retired law enforcement official, and who did not, who posted a lot of anti-Semitic things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and was possibly known to gender. That may be the person that they're referring to. This is all highly, highly speculative, and you should not take this. You should take this with the grain of salt or the grain of sand, as it were. But the real story here, or at least in terms of the I Don't Speak German audience, is the second you say federal agent with connection to this, the entire far right narrative is the FBI made him do it. The FBI made him do it. And suddenly there is no connection between the violent fantasies that the mainstreamers on the Daily Show talk about like what they would, what politically they would like to do to the Jewish people and to Black people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no connection between that and the actions of Peyton Gendron and the people like him, because there was a federal agent involved. Now, let me just for the record, during the global war on terror era, it was routine for federal agents to infiltrate mosques and to, basically gin up people who were saying some nasty things about wanting to blow up people and, et cetera, et cetera. Gave them, set them up, gave them fake bombs, and then arrested them, and then said, like, look at the heroic thing we did. We saved, so many people, and then just enacted absolutely horrifying civil rights abuses against Muslim populations in this country. They didn't
even have to do that. They put groups of Muslims in prison for going to holiday resorts and taking footage of taking film, and they just decided that these people were casing the joint, because they were planning to bomb it. So because they walked around filming their trip to Disneyland or wherever, so these guys would just be arrested. So it wasn't all, they weren't just framing people. They were just sort of arresting people that went to holiday resorts.
But to be clear, what the FBI, the plan was, we're going to set this person up and then make them not do the thing that we say they're doing. And then we get accolades for having foiled a terror plot. Mm-hmm. Not let it happen so that we can then claim we need more money. Like, that's not the way this works. That's just not the way any of this works. It's like the dubious police practice, where they say, oh, so and so is asking about hitmen, and they fix the guy up with a fake hitman, and there's a camera in the car, and then it ends up on TV. They don't actually organize a murder and then charge the guy with murder. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. And Gendron, again, as I said, there were every opportunity, if there were feds actually following this guy who didn't, who are not like in line with his ideological agenda, if they're like, they had every chance to catch this guy like 2 weeks ahead of time. All you had to do was ginny up a traffic stop, which any cop worth his badge knows how to fake, pull someone over for a traffic stop, long enough to find a bunch of guns in his car.
You got something hanging from your rearview mirror.
Yeah. I mean, just follow. I mean, look, you follow anybody, for, 20 minutes, and you can find some pretext. Oh, there's again, another Supreme Court case that 5-4 covered. There's a Supreme Court case in which there was a couple of people in a known drug area, who stopped at a stop sign for slightly too long, and this was suspicious behavior, and therefore this is our pretext for a stop, and then we get to count all the drugs we found as it's all perfectly legal search. A cop will find a reason, even if they literally, even assuming they don't lie, which cops lie fucking constantly. But like, even assuming that they're even telling the truth about the facts, Your Honor,
it's a gang sign.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Peyton Gendron had, I promise you, he committed some traffic violations on his drive to Buffalo that day. It would have been very easy to pull him over in advance if that was what they wanted to do. And they didn't. So I think if the Sandman character is an FBI agent, and if then this is someone that is an avowed white nationalist and is an avowed siege pillar, terrorgrammer, etc., and wanted this to happen, like, and not someone who is doing the secret bidding of the FBI to entrap innocent white nationalists. That's not what's happening here.
Yeah. In its shape, it's the it didn't happen. Even though if it had happened, it would have been good because they deserved it. It should happen. It didn't happen, but it should have done, and it was good, even though it didn't happen. It's conspiracy theory view that leads Gendron to say, well, that the sugar Jew is making me fat or whatever. No, there's a structural problem here, which is that capitalism loads all our food with sugar and salt because we humans are probably evolutionarily disposed to want to eat stuff like that. So even our cornflakes is full of fucking sugar and salt. it's not the evil sugar Jew, trying to lure you into McDonald's. In exactly the same way, it's not the evil feds who are, as you say, tricking the innocent white nationalists into murdering people. It's a structural problem, which is, that there are white nationalists.
Indeed. And capitalists, for that matter. And sometimes the two are one and the same.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. I think we have gone on long enough for this episode. Again, there is so much more we could go through, but I'm feeling done with this topic for a while. May do some writing on this. I might. I don't think we're going to do another podcast. We got other topics to cover. But I just wanted to kind of get some of that subtlety out there. And if you are a journalist listening to this and you are curious about my thoughts on this topic and you want to do something to cover this in more detail, in more nuance, please, you know how to find me. So do so.
Yes, indeed. Well, I want to reiterate, although we have had some laughs and so on in this episode, I want to reiterate that neither of us think that either of these terrible mass murders are in any way funny. They are tragedies, and it's a cliche, but it's true nonetheless. Our hearts go out to the victims and their families.
No, absolutely.
There is none of the levity in this episode should be taken as meaning that we have anything less than total respect and sympathy. And indeed, this episode is respectfully dedicated to the victims of these two massacres.
Absolutely.
And I'm not, having said that, I'm not now going to puff my Patreon. So I'm just going to say thank you for listening, and tune in next time for another episode. Do we have a planned topic for that?
I think we have a planned topic. I guess this is always a bad time to hype something, but I did consult on a video about Elijah Schaffer by the YouTuber Jose.
Oh yeah.
That turned out to be, that is Jose obviously made the video. I mean, we just kind of shared resources and chatted a bit about some of the perspective. But he took it in its own complete direction, and made it something really, really interesting about it. And your voice is actually in the video. I am, thanked for my help at the end. And we will put a link to that in the show notes, so you can definitely go check that out. And we have tentatively scheduled an interview with Jose. And we're going to come on and just kind of talk about Elijah and about some of that larger ecosystem. So definitely check that video out. It's very, even if I had not been involved in it, I would say it's very good. So
absolutely. Yeah, it is very good, as indeed is a lot of Jose's content. I've long been a subscriber of Jose's and a watcher of his. It's good stuff. Okay, so that's another episode down, 110, and we will be back, as I say, probably with that interview.
Sooner than we were the last time. This one got delayed a few times because of busyness and illness, and just a complete lack of willingness to talk on this topic. So,
just sheer, I cannot fucking face it-ness on my part mostly, but also I think on Daniel's, both of us.
Yeah. It wasn't even the not wanting to examine the material, because I can examine the material and that's, it's not that's fine, but at least I'm used to it. But then every time I sat down to think I'm going to talk about this now, it was just nails on a chalkboard to me. I literally felt like I wanted to vomit sitting and talking about this. But a little bit of time has passed, and it's been, I found the structure, and that's what I needed. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it or got something out of it. And we will be back sooner rather than later. So thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Take care. That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Loon the Band.